Seeing as a goal of DeSci is to use blockchain technology to break down data silos and create a decentralized scientific ecosystem, can each of you briefly describe how your own project relates to this concept, particularly with respect to biomarkers of aging? So, Niklas, how about we start with you?
Yeah. So at LabDAO, we're very much focused on the infrastructure for decentralized science, with decentralized science, as you already described it, being an evolution from open science, where now it's not only about sharing the results from scientific research, but also making sure that we can fund open science in a democratic way, and we can exchange value and assign ownership and using these new technical primitives. At LabDAO, we focus a lot on the formation of scientific teams online, so that actually scientists can come together online and do scientific work online, and then providing these teams with the resources they need. So, for example, the access to laboratory services, so they can actually run the scientific experiments that they have in mind while operating in a completely distributed context. In like a specific regard to aging biomarkers, I'm also a core at VitaDAO, and LabDAO was very much inspired by something I saw at VitaDAO that was missing, which was we were taking funding and we were going to the traditional universities and supporting their work. But I think there is more potential in actually forming completely new groups of scientists to come together and solve some of the problems that we have and challenges that we have in this space in new forms. And we're building the infrastructure to enable them.
Great. Yeah. And on that last point, that's very much in line with just this notion of decentralization. And one of the things that I'm loving to see is that DAOs themselves are just flowering out into other DAOs, taking on the respective components. So that's a good segue into Todd, since you're also at VitaDAO.
That's right. And so VitaDAO, for those of you who aren't aware, is a decentralized autonomous organization. And VitaDAO takes our funds and actually goes and funds early stage longevity research. So although LabDAO, Niklas, would actually provides the plumbing, VitaDAO actually provides funding into these early stage projects. And so as far as biomarkers are concerned, I mean, I think one of the big things in our field and in longevity in general is finding biomarkers that are acceptable to determine whether the therapeutics that we're funding, if you're VitaDAO, actually are achieving the end goals. And I know Kevin before this panel had mentioned, talking about seeing actual evidence of things actually working. So biomarkers is important for VitaDAO, not only to establish whether the investments are working, but also to just get past the regulatory hurdles, because that's one of the big things, is finding a set of biomarkers that the regulatory agencies would support as actually being beneficial.
Absolutely. And that too will tie into the interview that I had mentioned on an earlier talk that we'll be dropping with Dr. Ronald Kohansky about this, because I think this idea of sort of a accumulation of deficits as a sort of a proxy biomarker, aggregate biomarker for aging will become more and more important to everybody. But speaking of biomarkers, Pio, you've been doing some interesting work, kind of in a little bit of a different vein, but hopefully will connect with what Todd was just saying. So tell us about that.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith. Yeah, so quickly, What is Forever? We built social games for healthy habits. And we incentivize our participants with Web3 mechanics. And so essentially, we see ourselves as the sort of the top of the funnel, right, for user acquisition into the decentralized platforms like VitaDAO, LabDAO, that at some point, will require larger number of users with their biometrics. And so just, again, quickly to, sort of visualize its steps, its HRV, it's those kinds of metrics that we can gather from wearables, right? And so we basically built these fun social games that help people, understand and just even set a baseline, right, for what it is, learn about themselves and what it is that, that's healthy, that's not healthy. And down the road, this potentially becomes a data platform, right, in a decentralized fashion.
Right. Yeah, I'm very optimistic that funnel will be very successful indeed, because there's a lot of people that just sort of you do this kind of work just for fun, steps competitions.
Exactly.
There's a lot of apps going on with, face smash and things like that. So people are already kind of comfortable using their data in this way, just not being actioned in this way. So very optimistic.
Yeah, and there's more, right? Like as we go down the road, like even with gyroscope and accelerometer, right? Like you can tell a lot just from that data, right? And there's been other discussions, and other companies that are also working in this space that are now even predicting, biological clock, right? Just from accelerometer data. So this is the sort of that bigger vision, right?
Absolutely. Todd, to swing back to you, given that two of the organizations you work with, VitaDAO and CuraDAO, both deal with the notion of representing or accessing health-related data via NFTs, be it intellectual property or biomarker data, for example. What advantages do you think this has compared to the other ways that things have been done before, and how can this facilitate decentralized healthcare and longevity?
Sure. So I think one of the first things that sort of jumped out to me with respect to NFTs, and especially what we now call IP NFTs, is this is basically this digital Web3 wrapper around traditional intellectual property. And what it provides you is the ability, certainly in the VitaDAO context, to invest resources in a particular asset. So typically, if you wanted to support or see through on a particular therapeutic, you usually invested in an entire company, a small biotech company. With IP NFTs, you can actually sort of crowdsource support around a particular asset, a particular small molecule or a particular mRNA payload. So that's a little bit different. The traditional way would be you'd have to support the entire company, whereas if you can encapsulate the IP, you would then have the ability to fractionalize that. You have the ability to invest in those individual assets. On the other side of it is a more personal side on the or on the NFT aspect, which comes to your own personal data. And I think Kevin may have mentioned in his talk that, one of the things that we're used to is you take a look at Google. Google makes billions of dollars off of our data, our choices, our usage. And when it comes to healthcare data, people are concerned with controlling their data, owning their data, deciding who gets to see it. But then there's also a monetization aspect, because that data can be useful, just like Google uses it to generate ad revenue and what have you. In the medical context, our data can be useful in large sets to help people do research. And so the NFT aspect has the ability to encapsulate our personal data and provide that in a controlled fashion, and potentially with a monetization aspect.
Right. Yeah, I think that could be super powerful, not just in the kind of ownership aspect of it, but if the data set itself that's tied to an NFT is some sort of, health data set, the NFT itself or the fractionalized component of it can be like the access
Absolutely.
point. So very, very powerful.
Yeah.
I want to bring this over to Niklas. I'm not actually sure of the answer to this question. In LabDAO as it is there any usage of NFTs right now for people to kind of, manage their lab exchange profile that way? If so, talk about it. If not, anything planned?
Yeah. So first, we're still pre-launch and the protocol is not active. That said, we do use NFTs. The way that we use them is a bit different than what you've been seeing, I think, in other contexts, where for us, NFTs are just tokens that point to a data set. And in this particular case, when you think through IP NFTs are token where the metadata points to a vault where basically there's a PDF scan of an exclusive sublicense document from a university tech transfer office. That's what an IP NFT is. The way that we think about NFTs is more as just general tokens of access to a particular data set. So instead of it pointing to a PDF document with the exclusive license, it points to an IPFS exposed object, such as a genome that was assembled, or a primary data set that was generated from booking a laboratory service. So the actual laboratory data, you could say the trade secret instead of the exclusive license. The way that these NFTs are generated is very automatic. So instead of negotiating and trying to leverage the IP and then creating an on-chain manifestation, the you could say the IP NFT, or just generally the tokenized data is generated automatically when you act on the exchange. So you have a counterparty that is offering laboratory services, that is data generating. You request a laboratory service and you offer a payment. And then that is already part of the metadata that goes into the NFT. And then once the work is done, the data that it was generated, so let's say it's just a picture of a cell, gets exposed to IPFS, and then a token is submitted and sent back. And basically the token serves as a receipt and a very clear sign of ownership that it was me that generated that data and paid for it. So yeah, we use NFTs a bit in, I think, what would generally be at this point in time considered a somewhat unconventional way. But we do think it's a relatively important primitive to assign ownership and manage these payment flows that are required to do this sort of remote generation of scientific data.
No, I think that's super important, because one of the critiques that's levied at NFTs in general, and our audience might only be familiar with sort of the gorilla meme JPEGs aspect of NFTs. When people talk about real utility, this is the kind of stuff that matters, right? And just a quick note for the audience, if you didn't know what IPFS is, it's interplanetary file system, which is basically just a decentralized way of storing data. But over to Pio, can you speak to how the kind of data exchanges that NFTs can facilitate in regard to biomarkers, and how this can also open up kind of better ways of doing things than has happened in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. So let me just, maybe paint a little picture on how the NFTs, work in our games. And so, just a quick background, we started with a steps competition that was just steps, 20,000 people played that game, generated about 500 million steps on the platform when they played that game. But that was just the beginning. So, and now we launched this character-based game. And so that's basically where you, by uploading your data, like your HRV, your sleep data, and other biomarkers, that essentially you create an NFT out of that character NFT, right? And so essentially, that NFT has been minted through the data and the number of data that you uploaded, right? So you could say that data is now stored within that NFT. So that's how we look at essentially we're still early in the building out these games, but that's sort of the beginning of how we see is that the data itself is attached to the NFT.
Yeah, I personally think that this is the aha moment for our entire field that is waiting to happen, because so many people, think of the video game community. I'm a gamer myself, right? You could spend hundreds or even thousands of hours like optimizing the parameters of your character because you want them to be just right. And if that was tied to you personally, that would be so engaging. It would incentivize you to have, really good lifestyle. And I think it'll really bring a lot of people into the field of aging. So
exactly. It's for us, it's education, right? So the reason why, this game and these games are I think, interesting is not only just the fact that it's fun to play, but also that you get to learn about your, heart rate and what is normal, what is not normal. And I just also want to make a distinction, right? There's sort of two types of NFTs. One, the character-based NFT that you sort of level up, right, through your exercise, through the actions that you perform. But then there's the second type of the NFT where the actual data is stored, right? And only the character one is the one you trade, right? So I, through my participation in the game, level up that character, right, and mint it at a certain level, and then I can, monetize it, right, by putting it on OpenSea, right? Somebody else can buy a leveled up, character, but that doesn't mean they're buying my data, right? So there's a distinction here between those two types of NFTs.
Right, absolutely. And Pio and I have been kicking around the term bio avatar for that, which
that's right.
Cool. Yeah, so if you want to popularize that, let's make it a thing. But back to Niklas, and this was a good segue here as well. Much of the time when we discuss DeSci or blockchain technology generally, we're talking about digital entities, right? But when it comes to biology, we live in the meat space. So can you speak to how organizations like LabDAO can help bring the physical and digital worlds in terms of data collection and standardization of biomarkers? Like, can the NFTs to interact with LabDAO, have preconditions that, you have to collect the data physically in the right way, things like this? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you were pointing two concepts out in your question. The first one is, how does the digital world and the physical laboratory world interact most effectively? And then the second concept was the standardization of like laboratory workflows. And I think the two are very much a lot in common. What we believe is that there are now more and more synthetic biology processes where the common way that they're being done, or just generally laboratory processes where the common way that they're done could be fairly standardized if there was an open source community that really cared about defining standards on how they have to be done, and if there was sufficient volume, sufficient demand in actually requesting them. And with LabDAO, the core hypothesis is that as more and more science is happening in an abstracted virtual format, and this is not only science that is nonprofit, this is also for-profit science happening in biotech. The term virtual biotech is a relatively well-known one. As more and more of that science is happening and being planned in the digital realm, can there be an open source movement to standardize some of these assays and then build an open source protocol, a Web3 protocol, in which scientists can request services that adhere to these standards. And really the way that a certain laboratory, a physical world laboratory, interacts with the protocol and with scientists that are working digitally is that there's a request and a token bounty that is posted to the exchange, and then any laboratory in the world can check the status of the exchange, see, oh, there's an open request, I can offer this laboratory service, I go and I claim this request, and then actually do the physical experiment, upload the data, and then send the data back to the requester and claim the bounty. And really all that this does is it is, I think, one of the basic building blocks, I hope, for an open source world in which services are offered by laboratories in exchange for payment. And this sort of idea of a cloud laboratory becomes way more accessible because it's not one monolithic company that is offering a cloud laboratory service, but it's literally an open source protocol that allows every laboratory in the world to serve as a data generating oracle in that sense. And that's frankly, that's what most of biotech and biology research is all about. It's about generating new data points about like complex biology and then fitting a better model on how organisms functions and how their function breaks down.
No, that's great to hear that you're creating these kind of interoperation points. This actually reminds me of something that I was talking with Oliver about like a decade ago, having to do with iGEM, right? These contests for genetic engineering, et cetera, where it would be so cool to see a version of something like iGEM, but where bounties are put out for very specific tasks that we think could be sort of decentralized in this way. And then companies or organizations or teams in an iGEM-like competition can all compete to try to fulfill that. So I think what you're talking about right there would pair nicely. So I don't know if anybody on the call here has any interoperation points ready with iGEM, but if not, we probably should, or think about something new. Very cool. And that's a good segue over to Todd. In your incarnation as working at DAO, can you kind of speak to how what Niklas was just talking about, how that might interact with sort of the WordPress plugin model that Mike was alluding to earlier in his talk?
Yeah, and I'll start with the VitaDAO side of it, because I think anybody that's doing investment, one of the things that really stood out for me as I got into this space was the amount of times that you're having to rebuild data sets or create your own data sets because you just can't get access. There's a lot of very good basic science that has been done over and over and over again because nobody has a way to share it. And so to Nicholas's point, I mean, if there's standardization and a way to share that data, and this touches on DAO as well, is that could be a lot more collaboration and a lot more research done for a lot less money is what it comes down to. And I think that from an investment standpoint, when you're funding projects, it would be nice to know that you're not just recreating the wheel over here before you can actually answer your main question. So I think that's a key part of it. So, organizations like LabDAO, fantastic, get the interoperability. DAO again is another thing, mostly on the sort of the bioinformatics side of things, that I think, and getting data from, smartwatches and devices, that I think, again, a great wealth of information that can be brought in and made available. And, it's only going to help reduce the barriers for other people to do good science.
Gotcha. Now, segueing off of that, it's clear to me, Pio, how basically games like MeBots could use biomarker data in them the way that we talked about, like steps data or something from your Apple Watch, etc. But maybe can you think about or vamp about ways in which that relationship can maybe go the other way by interoperation through things like CureDAO and VitaDAO, and basically how can we make that relationship bi-directional, give the players more information and also have them contribute to something greater than just MeBots?
No, absolutely. Actually, Mike from CureDAO, we've already had those discussions and connections already, because I think, it's, as I was saying earlier, it's education, right? For me personally, I think, that's how that was the inspiration for MeBots, like I started getting really interested about, my own health, right? And then I was like, well, how do I actually get this out to a lot more people, right? And then when I talked to Mike, obviously, his platform is there's a lot of sort of power that can be extracted, like a lot of information that can be extracted from that data, right? So we started integrating, and so one example could be, for example, trying to correlate, running studies on, is the number of steps that you take a day affect your sleep quality, right? And those are very simple sort of, first sort of attempts, but I feel like, just that alone, gets the foot in the door, so to speak, right? Like for both sides, right? Because now, the devices that you had to connect to be able to collect that data are now connected now, and now that can feed into a platform that Mike has built, right? And down the road, if there is a clinical trial, right, that could use, some specific, cohort of people, we now have 100,000 people that are signed up into this, connected into those platforms, and maybe 1% of those people fits the profile, right? So that's, I feel like, again, I'm the top of the funnel, right? I want to create fun experiences that are almost like a Trojan horse, into bringing people into self-awareness, right? Like, and that's why I'm excited about, Web3 and the decentralization here is like, I think of it as, one of the core tenets of Web3 is becoming self-sovereign in terms of your financial future, right? Here I see, being self-educated and self-sovereign when it comes to your health, right? And your well-being, right? Like you actually start to care about your health, and you start to care by looking at your own data and almost treating it like a game, right? And we ask why, we know what to do, right? What's good, what are the right things to do? Sleep better, eat better, all these things. But most of people don't do it because they don't, that's my theory, they don't understand why, and they don't see the results, right? But once you start looking at the results, and once you start looking at the, all the output that's coming out in a fun, engaging way, you get excited, and then you're like, aha, if I start doing this, I'm gonna feel better. That's the quick, Yeah,
I was gonna say this ties to the tighter feedback loop that Michael Gear was talking about earlier, and
that's right.
I'm now wondering if you saying that getting the foot in the door was an intentional pun or not with the steps data.
Right.
But to piggyback off of this, yeah, I've been personally speaking with a lot of the, I guess you'd say, AAA blockchain gaming studios to try to figure out how we can incorporate this data, because I agree with what you were saying there, Pio, is, don't get me wrong, it's super important to get the Horvath clock and, all these epigenetic clocks and deeper aging biomarkers. But I think we'll look back in a few years and be surprised by how much the doors got blown open by just like simple physiological metrics and how they can really get people excited, right? So obviously you were just talking about being the top of the funnel here, Pio, but I want to ask Niklas, again, this might be more Pio's vector, right? But can you think of other ways that this kind of data can create, like how do we create like an ice bucket challenge for this? In addition to just personally motivating you, is there something that can be done that's very inspiring that would, get everyone together on something like an ice bucket challenge kind of thing?
So I think one problem that we have been facing in the past with publicly funded scientific projects is that there's, you could say, a principal agent problem, where the principal is a society that's funding the science, and then the agents are a smaller group of 3 professors that are supposed to run the project. And there have been multiple cases where this sort of misalignment, where there's an information asymmetry, it's the taxpayer or a foundation indirectly that's giving a grant to a group of scientists, and then that group of scientists is generating a really interesting data set. But is using that data set for primarily publishing by themselves, and there's basically data not leaving the circle of these scientists, because it is actively withheld in order to extract the most amount of insight and concentrate most of the insight on these scientists. I think something that you could do now with these tools that are available to us is you can try to almost disintermediate some of this process, where if a group of scientists comes together and very transparently defines a set of experiments, and maybe that is even an experiment or a data collection effort where an individual has to collect data, then that process, that protocol, can be open sourced, and the tracking of the information can be done in a very transparent way, where, for example, the ice bucket challenge would be take a certain blood test or undergo a certain intervention, take a certain biometric data set and contribute it to a commons so that we can do certain research. So basically, could we generate a UK biobank that is completely distributed, where running something like a 23andMe is actually relatively affordable now. If people were collectively donating money, we could generate a very large amount of, I think, new biological insight. And I think a lot of reasons why people are not, for example, doing 23andMe is because there is this sort of misalignment of potential incentives where you don't know exactly what's happening with your money. However, if there was a funded project where it was very clear how the data is being handled and where it is gathered, and you can use some of these Web3 primitives to ensure that, I could see something like a ice bucket challenge emerge, where people feel very comfortable sending or sharing some biological data of themselves to a project that is adhering to these like rules that Web3 makes us all be accountable to.
Gotcha. You just made me think of something like on the spot here. Video game streamers do a lot of charity raising, games done quick, Extra Life, etc. Right? So you made me just wonder if it might be possible to structure something where, if we partnered with an organization like that, very frequently there'll be a lot of people on the stream like reacting to the things that are happening, right? And that reaction itself, decision-making speed, cognitive biomarker, or even facial biomarker stuff. So it makes me wonder if in the future there's a way to kind of structure something like that, where literally by you participating in the live stream and just reacting to things, that itself becomes a collection of like useful biomarker data. I just thought of that on the spot. So I'll have to think about it some more. But over to Todd. I know that VitaDAO is obviously very interested in trying to engage the public, et cetera. So what we were just talking about maybe is a little bit more clinical in nature. Do you have any ideas of things that might be like readily exciting to your everyday person with this kind of biomarker NFT stuff that we're talking about?
Well, I think Piotr brought up a good point. I mean, I think anything you can do to gamify the process is going to be beneficial. So just taking, for example, we were talking about 23andMe. So if you go and get your genome sequenced, what I've seen in some products, and I've seen, Nebula Genomics as another example, what you get is, okay, so you have this data, but most people have no idea how to interpret it or what to do with it, right? I mean, what do you do with your genome? I have my FASTQ file. Great. What do I do with it? So it's the interpretation of what that is. And so anything that you can do to say, if you make these changes in your lifestyle, you should see this kind of change in your biomarkers. And hey, it's instant feedback, right? As you say, tighten the feedback loop. That's what's going to work. Because most people have health in general. If you think about exercise, diet, it's very slow moving. It takes months, years. It's not something that is obvious to you because you can't always physically or visually see it. And so you need that kind of feedback to motivate people. It's as simple as that.
Right. You just made me think of the most ancient motivator of all, which is, try to be appealing to potential suitors or suitorettes, right? So what I was just thinking there is, you'll be hearing about this at an interview that Stephanie is actually doing with Fred Zhang about an NFT project that we're working on called Lifespan Legends, where one of the parameters of the NFTs is these are based on like historical characters or fictional characters, but the NFT art itself can age over time. And then if you take some action, you donate or something like that, it'll reverse the age. So what you just made me think of, Todd, combining it with that is, if someone hasn't created, I'm sure it's just around the corner, some NFT based like dating service, right? And we'd have to be careful about how we do this so it's not ageist in any way. But like if your NFT's parameters were changed based on your health parameters, including de-aging if you are biologically younger, and that itself is actually interesting because I remember there was a lawsuit a few years ago where this person had a Tinder profile or something like that, and he was 50 years old. But he felt like he was 40 years old. So he put 40 on his profile, but then people were like, oh, you're lying. And he's like, no, like I feel like I am 40 years old. So what does that equation look like if someone is through biomarker testing being able to say, no, I actually am biologically 40 years old? So again, not fully formed thoughts here, but any quick rejoinder to that, Todd, before I kick it over?
Well, I think that's probably true. I'd probably sign up tomorrow. I mean, I could use a bit of rejuvenation that way. But honestly, I think you're right. I mean, I think that anything that can motivate people, and what motivates people is somewhat different. I mean, some people just want to live healthy lifestyle. Some people would do it more as a game. I think when you're younger, you probably would do it more for the game aspect of it. Whereas as you get older and you start feeling those aches and pains and lower back pain, you start going, okay, I'm starting to get old. Maybe I have to start getting serious about this. And then you're into it for, actually looking for ways to improve your existence. So I think that's probably the truth.
Gotcha. So now that we've probably been in your wheelhouse the whole time, Pio, has this conversation made you think of anything new or?
Oh, yeah. So just wanted to definitely mention this. It's a great segue into this fact that, what part of the core of what we're trying to do here is build social games, right? Because when you think about it, like just high level, right? Like what is, for example, Facebook, right? Facebook is you are looking at other people's, actions and that we've evolved, right, to do that. 20,000 years ago, we were in groups, sitting by the riverbank, right, and looking at each other and observing each other. And that's where I feel like, part of what MeBots is and those kinds of games is you play with other players, right? Like you look at what actions they're taking. Oh, this MeBot's, HRV has improved. What has he done? And again, it's done in a anonymized way, right? So it's not attached to a real identity unless you, very obviously want to, be, not anonymous, right? But through the NFT, you're essentially anonymized, right? And so then the actions that you take, the better quality of sleep, the more steps you take during the day, and therefore your score is improving. And now you're competing, right? There's a scoreboard, right? Like as they say, how do you create a game? You put up a scoreboard, right? And that's a game, right? So that's what I mean is that it has to be social because that's how we have evolved, right? Like we look at other people, we like to compare ourselves with other people, and that's where like, how do we bring that into the health, aspect? How do I almost, in a certain way, like that's why we don't have, absolute, like it's not about the total number of steps. It's about consistency, for example, right? So from the beginning, we've optimized the game so that it is about take at least, 7,000-8,000 steps a day, not how do you take the most steps, because then it obviously quickly evolves into not so healthy, right, competition, right? So you gotta set the parameters, but I feel the social aspect and like you said, maybe even dating, right? Like that's absolutely on the table as well.
Right. That makes sense. So on the subject of being social and interaction points, I'm very interested in how we as a field can basically increase the pace of everything by interoperating better, right? So Niklas, you had mentioned earlier, bounties and sort of token rewards, et cetera. So the question, this is like an open question to anybody on the floor here. What forms do we envision like such interoperations between the DAOs right here, for example? Is it just, token swaps at points where services are exchanged, or is there something more than that? Are there bottlenecks to Web3 interoperations like this? How can they be overcome, et cetera?
Yeah, I think the DAO to DAO collaboration piece is something that is still not fully figured out yet. And I think what we today call a DAO, what will be the average DAO in the future is also going to be very different. I think. I personally at LabDAO, the way that we think about the infrastructure that we're providing is that we actively invite partners to work with us. So, for example, right now there's a project where we're doing in silico drug discovery for a particular target that has been worked on by a professor within VitaDAO. Now, this is a very first pilot, but what we would love to see and what we're working towards, and it's great Todd is on this call, is to have more spaces where we actually have labs within LabDAO that have a co-sponsor. So another project that I cannot disclose too much about because we're just getting started on it is with PsyDAO, where we're doing plant genomics work. So with LabDAO, we bring scientists that really understand this method really well. We take care of that. The infrastructure is there, the compute infrastructure, the pipelines are maintained to do the plant genomics analysis and the assembly of, for example, a fungal genome. And then PsyDAO can come in and can sponsor it and can open some doors in the social network that is required to lead such a project to success. And now, if you think about that on a token level, the teams that are working at this intersection, they can be incentivized using both tokens. The tokens can have various different functions. Within LabDAO, we think about the token also as a reputational mechanism. You stake your token into transactions on the marketplace to make sure that you basically have something to lose and you're an aligned actor. And I guess that this is just the beginning. So yeah, I foresee a lot of interactions and interoperability beyond what I just pointed out.
That all makes sense. Now, Todd, Pio, do you see any other kind of ideas for interaction points? I guess maybe almost more of a technical question, like aside from just kind of swapping currency, is there anything else that maybe NFTs can facilitate through the technological possibilities of ways for organizations to work together?
Well, I think that, and as I'll use SecureDAO as an example, there's all kinds of different data sets out there. And so the ability to you could have a DAO that has a particular data set focused on, proteins, for example, or another DAO that's focused on genomic data. And each of those DAOs could contribute that. And you need some sort of glue to be able to allow that information to flow into projects. You might want to go get genomic data from Genomes DAO and something from CureDAO and hand that all off to Niklas at LabDAO and have some of the people that are on the LabDAO platform do something with it. So how do you make that happen? And how do you make the incentives work the right way? And I think, when we talk about DAO to DAO type relationships, or even DAO to, real world entities, those are the things, that's the plumbing that we still have to develop. And I agree with Niklas. I think we're just kind of getting started. We're focused on the incentives from an economic standpoint, but I think there's some other ways that we have to learn how to interact to be effective. And that's what it comes down to.
That all makes sense. On that subject, Pio, are you currently working with any other DAOs with projects like MeBots?
Not yet, but absolutely, right? These are early days and I feel like, we're just getting started, but just getting this fact that okay, now there's a marketplace, right? And okay, we got the NFTs on the marketplace, but next, there's going to be probably ERC20 token, right? So yeah, absolutely. Early days, but I feel like, it's a green field and very excited.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see. I'm hoping that everybody at this conference will be able to find a way to interoperate with each other. And as you all know, I've been kind of running around trying to stitch together those points. So I think we're close to seeing some very interesting collaborations. We started the panel a few minutes late, so we'll just go a few minutes extra. I have one more question, and we'll see if we have audience questions. And my last question is a pretty open-ended one. Given what we discussed, what do you see in your mind? What do you think will be the first like massive win for DeSci, generally or in regards to aging? And what can everybody here at this conference, even those not necessarily into blockchain technology, do to make that happen as fast as possible? Open to the floor, whoever wants to field it. Or I'll call on someone, Todd.
Okay, fair enough. I think what will be interesting for DeSci is when organizations like LabDAO, VitaDAO, et cetera, can actually do their own end-to-end drug discovery. Go out, do the work, bring it to a point where now you have some molecules, goes to LabDAO, someone does the medicinal chemistry. And it would be nice to see that end-to-end process. And I think, and then spin out a biotech and VitaDAO funds it on the back end. So I think we're all attacking the problems that we see in the system from a slightly different angles. Now, having done that, that's great, but we have to be able to now put all the Lego pieces back together and get an end-to-end pipeline and do that efficiently. And if we can do that and at the same time convince people beyond, we tend to operate in a little bit of a bubble in our space, right? The longevity field is somewhat small. Get the general public to understand the science we're doing. One of the things that was quite striking to me, and I think anybody who sort of knows me, I came from outside a biology background. I was really surprised at how people really don't understand the seriousness of the science that's going on in a lot of longevity fields. Like the general public has no idea what the kind of cool stuff that's going on. And we don't do a very good job of communicating that. And as a result, people don't not so much pay attention from on the cover of Newsweek or Time magazine, but there's not a push to say, hey, we should be funding these guys more, right? The amount of money in this space is so small compared to other areas of medical, research. So I think we have to overcome that in this process somehow.
Okay, I have a somewhat hot, maybe controversial hot take on that. I had mentioned it in my opening talk, if you saw it, where I think the problem might be shifting into a slightly different one. I think it's becoming more clear that a large percentage of the public is becoming at least kind of ambiently aware that stuff is happening here and optimistic. Like the poll that I cited was an AARP poll that was like 75% of like all age cohorts would like, give me that pill for age, even if health is not guaranteed. And if health was guaranteed, it went to like 85%. So I think the issue that we might be at now is people might think that it might be possible now, but there's kind of a loss of faith in the existing systems. So people don't trust some agency to figure it out or something like that. And that's a problem that I think decentralized science can really come to the rescue on, both by coming up with an alternative model, but then also by working with those established systems by presenting a good proof of concept. So I'll answer my initial prompt to you myself. The one that I think will be the first big win for DeSci, and that's why Oliver and I are working on it, is a demonstration of a truly decentralized clinical trial that has some real result. So Oliver and I are targeting dementia, partially because dementia is horrible, but partially because the existing system has thrown everything they've had at it for 30 years, and I think literally trillions of dollars over the 30 years, or at least $1 trillion, with pretty much no results. So if a bunch of people on the internet can come together and get anything done, it's like, whoa. And I think then if we also remediate dementia at all, I think dementia low-key kind of serves like a Stockholm syndrome role that people have with the whole endeavor of aging. Like, come on, you guys are going to work on aging. We can't even like do anything against Alzheimer's disease. So I think if we can move the needle on that, that would be a big deal. So that was a little bit of a hawking of my own project. Over to Pio, what are your thoughts on this? Well, what to you will be the first big, massive win for DeSci?
Yeah, so what I was going to say as well is what Todd was saying, that, the first time we get, a clinical trial through, that would never be sponsored by big pharma, right? Vitamin D for, certain ailment, right? And there's actually clear, double blind placebo trial that, and then it can be prescribed, right? And so that obviously is the big win. But for me, why I'm working on what I'm working is, again, I agree with you, right? It is the fact that like how do we get people to, like, almost like a grassroots movement, right? Like, how do we get people into this, not just from the fact that, hey, you know, maybe something can be done, but like, I can do something about my own health, right? Like, and here's how I do it. And step by step, you know, like, I have formed these healthy habits that would, you know, and it takes, you know, the 10,000 step journey. It starts with the first step, right? That to me is like, and we all have to be, you know, sort of take ownership of that ourselves and sort of become sovereign in terms of our health, as I was saying earlier. So just more people, you know, doing this, to me, is going to be the success.
Makes sense. Niklas, any final points on that before we transition to audience questions?
I think generally when we think about the interaction of Web3 and the real world, and I'm not going to add too much, I think it's all about getting especially some of the scientists that are already working like within academia or within industry to wake up to the potential of the tools that we are setting out to build. I think one of the reasons why we are still a bit at the fringes is because we haven't yet produced a lot of very useful software, a lot of very useful tooling. I think we have still to like prove why we are here and have to do some real work. But I think if we succeed in building things that scientists want, if we succeed in building things that can outperform the status quo for patient data collection, lifestyle changes, the way that science is getting funded, then I think we're going to get to a really, really exciting spot where everybody in the world can participate in science and fund it, run it, share data. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of time, and we have to build some useful tools for both scientists and patients, and see how they will perform in the real world.
I agree. And to kind of tie things narratively back to how we started this conversation, this is why I'm personally very optimistic, because I think it's incorrect to kind of look at the pace of aging research as kind of linear, right? Because I feel like we've done a lot of beating our heads against the wall up until now, but I think we're very close to when there's a first demonstration of something that's going to have a tangible result. And I think once that happens, a lot of the objections that people have will just immediately vanish and be like, if I could just take a vitamin that makes my hair darker, you better believe everyone's going to jump on that immediately. And that will just change the entire conversation. So I think hopefully we've done a lot of the activation energy work, and we're about to get over the hurdle. So hopefully we'll see. Oliver, I'd like to summon you to see if there's any audience questions, and maybe you have some of your stuff.
Yeah, well, I don't want to. I think you kind of reflected the same viewpoint I have as far as, you know, I think the public is ready, has always been ready. I don't think there's any barriers to there. I do think that there's certain, monolithic barriers that are kind of, related to agencies and bureaucracies, but it's all about liberty and pursuit of happiness. So they have to serve the people. So I think eventually, if we get a lot of this happening outside the system is just forced to change. And we've seen that in the past many times. Just one tiny example is not what we're doing here, which is kind of a very high tech way, but we've seen this happen with people that are activists and getting the change happening when it came to the HIV epidemic, for example. A lot of that change came outside of the institutional structure, and change happened that way. So I think a lot of that's that's on us to make this happen, right? So, and that's what we're all here to basically push this forward. But as far as questions, I'll kind of push that towards the audience, and I think we have got a couple here. Question one, let's see, private labs have quality control and reputational incentives to do reliable work. If you have a decentralized network that anybody can add data to, what ensures quality and avoids scams? And I think we've heard that with Wikipedia and et cetera, and so on and so forth. But I guess everybody can give their viewpoint on this.
Yeah, I'll kick off and then I'll pass it around. But like what I say is this just kind of leans on the general mechanisms of blockchain technology, right? Like in certain models like proof of stake, et cetera, you have these validator nodes that are kind of doing the work to validate the network, and they're rewarded for that in currency. But if you are a bad validator, the system will recognize that and you'll get deprioritized and eventually you'll get excluded. So you can build in mechanisms that sort of disincentivize people from doing bad things, right? I'll kick it over to, because I'm probably one of the, Niklas probably has more direct experience with this kind of stuff than I do. So did I say an accurate statement there?
No, I think this is very accurate. There has to be, however, I think a slight modification with when we think about these like very pure Web3 use cases. You can have multiple validators, and you can have programmatic systems of trust and slashing of staked tokens, because it's very programmatically testable whether the work that was done, that the computation that was done was true or not. When you have distributed networks of laboratories, the system gets a bit more complex, because just running the same Western blot 5 times, everybody that is like gone to grad school or like spend time in a lab knows that 5 times running the same Western blot looks very different. So you were not going to be able to just hash the picture of the Western blot and then see that the hashes will line up and do some kind of like programmatic penalization if the hashes don't line up. That's not how it's going to work. So you need something else. And the jury is still out how that something else is going to look like. I think it will contain, and I said that also in a response to Mike Sin's question. I think it's going to be at least 3 mechanisms. It's going to be mediation of or arbitration of conflicts, especially while the funds are still held in escrow for a transaction. So if I pay a lab to do something, I get the result back. The money is not instantly paid out. And there's a time period where I can basically call the customer service, and that can be a completely distributed set of providers of arbitration. Just like in the legal world, there's not one customer service for all of the world economic exchange, but there's this set of law firms that you can choose from to do the arbitration. And I expect there will be sort of a set of arbitration providers here eventually as well. Then on the second note, we're going to be staking lab tokens. So if you're found guilty of bad behavior, you're losing some parts of the ownership. And that's something you touched before, Keith. And then I think the third element is that you have to perhaps apply to become a provider on the marketplace, which I guess points to a broader observation or prediction that I have on how this is all going to look like. Namely that it's going to be a bit less like blockchain and code and a bit more just like humans and like soft interactions, where you have a laboratory that wants to join the exchange. They go into Discord, they introduce themselves, they go through an online form, they talk to 2 people, then eventually there's a DAO vote, they get accepted into the exchange. Eventually, maybe that is scaled up. However, there is way more trust in here. And also the validation of whether a service was done the right way is, I have a bad experience. I start an interaction with a contract to dispute it. There again are humans meeting in a room talking about whether it was appropriate or not, and then drawing conclusions. It's not going to be that clean, unfortunately, but we can at least build pretty clean infrastructure to plumb that service and guide it. And that's what we're busy doing at LabDAO.
That makes sense. You can't fully avoid the meat space. I think we have time for one last question, and I see one coming from Mike to Pio. You mentioned maintaining privacy with the MeBot NFTs. What are some strategies or tools used for this privacy preservation?
It's a great question. So yeah, I mean, obviously a couple points on that, a couple of thoughts. So obviously, removing PII, that's immediate, right? Like, so assigning, a unique ID to that data and not tying that to the actual, user login or email or anything like that. But then 2, a couple of more thoughts on that, because there's a couple of different, I think, sort of, different ways when we can talk about it. What does it mean? Like, do you mean privacy in terms of like the data is just never accessed by the centralized system, or accessed for period of time, right? And let's say, for example, then the owner of the data is, incentivized to stake their data, right? And while they're staking their data, then they earn a token, right? So that's one way of thinking about it. And also, obviously, with Web3, your private key can become a way to encrypt the data, right? So the data is only stored encrypted and never accessed by any centralized service. It's only visible to you once you connect with your wallet, right? And then you decrypt and see the data yourself. So several different ways of thinking about this, I think, and we're still early, right? Obviously in this space, and a lot of research is happening. Ocean protocol, right, is something I've been looking into as well, where they have this concept of compute to data. I think that's what it's called. Anyway,
Yeah, I think we'll put a pin in this conversation for maybe next year's panel, because I think this is going to be a key issue. Sort of, it also touches like proof of human issues and
exactly
wrestling, right? And it also
soulbound tokens and
yes, a good video game reference from Vitalik there.
Yeah.
And this also ties to what was being discussed earlier in terms of federated learning and synthetic data, et cetera. So I think this will be a blossoming. I think we'll have things to talk about by next year. But with that, I'd like to thank everybody for participating. I encourage all the audience members, especially if this is new to you, to check out all the respective DAOs that were mentioned here: LabDAO, CureDAO, VitaDAO, Forever Today, and the MeBots project. Thank you to our sponsors and Lifespan Heroes and everyone who makes this possible. And if you found this topic interesting, we're going to be talking more about blockchain technology in general and funding on day 4. And part of our showcase videos that are part of this platform talk about some of the blockchain technology related projects that Lifespan.io is working on, including interfacing with everyone that's here on the panel. So Oliver, any final closing thoughts for the day? But I thought this was a great panel, and I appreciate everyone joining me.